Hi, I'm Seamless, and it's Wednesday, which means it's time for a new viewer track review video. If you'd like to have your track in one of these videos, the only way to do it right now is to join up on the Discord and submit it through the Discord channel. There's rules, there's the instructions, follow them, and then it'll happen. I'm working on other and different ways and other kinds of videos for things that might not be just this, but for now there is just this, and that is just the way. Anyway, let's begin with today's chunk of randomly selected songs with Clown House by AkZeNT. Nice. All right. Yeah, that's clowny, all right. Okay, so you saw me zoom out there, maybe if you're watching this whole thing through, when I got around here, and the reason I did that was to look and see how much of this was just gonna be what it was until it ended, and then I was like, okay, and I didn't stop this track, and I don't really, I think I probably have in previous ones, but I don't want to stop any of the tracks. I just want to let them play through to make certain that we aren't missing anything, because sometimes it's possible, but also to sort of drive home some of the points about arrangement. And one of the points, the big point about this track is this one really feels like the motions, the track. And what I mean by that is that it's very solid. Like, this is a very done up good, like, a beat, you know, it's happening. And I'm sure if there were vocals, if this was designed for vocals, this would come together a little more, but it would still have the same kind of I'm calling it a problem, but it's honestly, it's pretty subjective. The idea that it honestly feels like some of these sections are only here because you're doing what you imagine is like the official thing to do with like sections and lengths and amounts and how much is changing and how much isn't changing and what do you expect to remain the same and how long it to be there and how long it to be there. Yeah. And instead of sort of either following your gut about how long some stuff should be or about how much it should be different between parts. Because it sort of feels like this part, I started to feel it around here where it was like, okay, this is going to happen, and then this is going to happen, and then it's going to be this again for a while. And I was just like, I can imagine being in the position where I'd write this because I wouldn't have enough like content to make this section if I, you know, because I would get at this point and be like, okay, I can either make new stuff to be here because this is her as hell, it can't be happening twice. Or I'm going to actually have it happen twice because then there needs to be something there for maybe there's already a verse happening. I don't know. But or a acapella or something. But point being is that this is repetitive as heck. It's still good though in terms of like functional, being a song, being a track, being present force and all that. Like very technically done up. It's just like this. When I was trying to formulate how to describe this when I was listening to it, when I was thinking to myself is like identifying what the point in your track is when you're making it, so that you're sort of making it like you have a sort of a goal to point towards. And this track feels like one of the goal was pretty much just to make it. And in the and at pretty much every stage actually, being a producer, you're like there's a certain amount of like I made this. That's enough of a thing to be like this is good. It hits the good switch in our brain. Even if like if we'd heard it from someone else, we'd have been like yeah okay sure yeah right yeah okay, but like not really like yo like we are about some of our own junk sometimes. That so like if the point of the track you're making is just to make it when someone else hears it, they don't really get that quality, and they have a harder time of like locating what the point might be, and so harken extra care to make sure there is some point then they can find, and usually it's like vocals and stuff. So like I could be thinking again about this track, like it's very doesn't have that. It's very blank, which is honestly excellent if you're like a vocalist looking for a beat. When you heard this they would love it. They'd be like, yeah, I'll take this. This is great. So it could be that. That could be that. I don't know. Oddly enough, the very first thing I ever tried to do was to be a hip hop beat like licensing producer, in the sense that like I make beats that I lease out and not necessarily produce for tracks, which is sort of how I prefer to do stuff. But that's how this is what it would be. This is what they'd be like. But also, most of the time when they're in that state, what it would be like is instead of it being just like the whole song already kind of laid out, it would honestly just be like this. Like this is how long the track would be, because that's all you needed to know. Like to advertise that you had a track is to just be like, cool, this is the beat, and then like if you want to license it, then you just have the layers, and then the beat basically handling the construction kit, and then they handle the rest. Then they figure this part out, that kind of thing. So. I get like the value of having an example arrangement, but as a standalone product, it has the problems that I have enumerated. Okay, moving on to the next track. This is Greasefire. Violet is not the color of royalty. Rough mix and master. Rough in the jungle. Okay, I'm digging the hard edges of sample pitching here. Or whatever that is. It might just be a filter. We'll find out.
Seeping out, violet ooze. 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 Seeping out, violet ooze.
Of course it ends like this. So wow. I have so much to say about this. Um I was gonna this is just a ride every second of the way because this intro was interesting and cool and all, but took too long. You know, I say that about a lot of stuff. And then this part kind of was a nice rise, and this felt a little doofy. And now when I say doofy, that's not like me saying I think it's stupid. I'm not. That's not a qualification. It's not a discussion about that. Like it's quality of sound. Like this you can kind of see it in the sense that like the sub and the kick are two together, and so the levels of like the sub is this more solid rounded effect versus a sharper hitting effect. And I know you know what I'm talking about because that shows it happens when the drop happens. And the drop is a combination of like serious majesty and other problems. So let's talk about the serious majesty. I talk about Mick Gordon a lot and how he does a really good job of mixing really heavy EDM and really heavy metal, despite the fact that the heaviness in both of those things comes from very different things. It's not very easy to mix together fully. Like, you can't, if you play like you would a metal drum kit, an electronic drum kit, you blow away everything because the side chaining is too harsh, so the double kick doesn't really work out. So the trick that Mick Gordon really worked out well and the Doom soundtrack is to do this essentially, which is to have the one really powerful kick that's for like when the electronic level kick and hit snare happens. But then when the drums for the metal stuff is happening, it just doesn't have the weight behind it. It's still happening. It's still happening when and the way it still makes the sound that hitting the kick hard enough to make that sound it makes. It just synthetically does not have the power to match up against the real thing, and so it doesn't depart its headroom demolishment. A mint that demolishes. But this is what's happening here. You can clearly plainly see this happen. And what's really cool about this is that it's not metal. It's the I don't know what kind of house they call it, the styles, the hardcore stuff. I guess just hardcore. I figured, you guys know what I'm talking about. It's like the style of like this stuff, like from the intro. But there's the more kind of modern cutting kick and snare work in here. That's really cool. And then it got really epic. Way over here when you're getting like the modulation level version of it happening. Where'd it go? Where? Give me Linkin Park vibes, that track Session they did when they like tuned the voice. Yeah, there it is. Of course, that's how it wanted to react. Wow, look at me. Fun stuff. It did, however, present obvious mixing challenges, and then it isn't helped by the lead, which is those two things are pretty much what I call the other problems. So the majesty was cool. The mix level of like what the sub is a bit much on the whole thing. Like, this is pretty much a dynamic range problem. Like, as far as you went with the kick and snare and differentiating them between like the repeating bass and the sub, I think you should have gone a little farther to make it so that the differences are a little more plain. And then on top of that, this lead doesn't help things. It's just the organ equality just doesn't work there. Like, I feel like I know the kind of super saw types of stuff that work there. I don't know if they were going for this type or not, because this is one of them. But the other ones are a little more like fitting, and it's the ones that aren't so octave based. And I don't know if you were playing octaves or not, but yeah, or if the harmonics of the octaves were being accented, like if you were using the harmonizer and Harmor, and the default settings which are set to do octaves, then it would make the notes tell you that. But like, that sound is just bleh. It can be fixed with some decent like detuning. You can go a little harder on it than that, or you can layer it with more mid-rangey stuff, or you could play not octaves. Like any kind of 3s and 5s. 5s are better than that. Like, they still work better than the octaves do. Like, sometimes octaves are important. Like, I'm not saying don't do parallel octaves. That's a kind of ye olde classical writing technique thing, parallel, to avoid doing those. But we don't gotta care about that. But we do gotta care about how that imparts like a harmonic layering effect, which sounds organy, which is what that was. Yeah. But I admire the hell out of this. It's problematic, much like a lot of the attempts that a lot of people have done, including myself, more often than I have done successful ones. The unsuccessful attempts to merge genres that don't merge well. This is a thing that this is a very technically difficult thing you have chosen to do, and you went pretty far. So good job. Moving on to Ishido, Cuba Libre. I have no idea if I pronounced any of those words correctly. Here comes the song. Dim tails. You guys heard that, right? What's that? What happened? You heard that that tape stop effect, right? I heard it, but then I noted that there wasn't really anything here that looked like it. Like that's not in there. That's weird. Okay, so that wasn't in the song. The song was cool. This is like the most fully laid out one of these I'd seen in a while. Like this is what it looks like on like vinyl from olden days, how long tracks are laid out. In fact, so much so that I'm not used to seeing something like this without vocals. And it feels a little bit weird for how long some of these parts are, for how long none of them don't. There's not like a lead element. I think, like, for example, how long it took to get to this part was one thing, and then how long the part actually was itself, because the part is good. I go a little harder on how hard it is, but these samples, I can't, they can only go so far. Like, I would say something about how like the levels of somebody can't go a little too close to each other, but like this sort of style sort of works that way. Like the liquid effect is to not be so abrasive, but in the kit anyway, but also to have very high presence on the sub, plus also being tuned high enough. Thematically, the song was great. Like texturally and like, written wise, it all feels excellent. Like it has a texture and a vibe to it that is all these things that it says it is. So that's cool. It just feels a little like the drums are sort of the weakest link here, because like great stuff. Like I can live with the trumpets. The trumpets are a little, especially when they move around too fast. Like on weak realism instruments. Like if you don't have like super credible articulated and billions of gigs of samples to just fix problems like that by putting the right stuff in there, they play to their strengths by not writing parts that sound fake. Or if you're gonna do that, like be prepared to carve them up and like fix the hell out of them. Like that's something that I do a lot and yield squid font sound font set of orchestra stuff. Very small, very compact, not a lot of articulations, not a lot of velocity, almost any velocity. So making variations and things that sounded realistic meant like loading up filters and timing them and having them carve stuff up. So like that's sort of what I mean by that. And like in particular, this like the do like how the trumpet, like the trumpet is the release tail is going over the end of the next, or going over the beginning of the next note, and that's not physically possible, so it sounds weird. Like that kind of stuff, like that, you just make sure it all kind of feels cohesive, because the realism of the rest of the stuff, I mean the synths and things going on, but like the texture of it all works, and it works because it doesn't defend the realism. And you can either have incredible articulated art like super sample sets or whatever, or you just not play the things that don't sound right, because even a bad sample can sound okay doing the one thing that it was recorded at. So like if it's just a one long sustained note, you can play it just a bunch of long sustained notes. It might be a boring part, but it'll sound real. And then you can have all the other stuff do interesting things. You can have like the synth leads and things like that. Like that's strategizing about like how to deploy your assets there. Anyway, moving on to Ymir by Maboroshi. All these words, I'm just not ever going to be sure if I'm pronouncing right. Okay, begin. This was super dope. I dug all of it. The octave lead in this one is slightly less offensive because I guess it just blends a little bit better with the mix, but it's still an octave lead. And I noted a bit in the very first time we get introduced to the dopeness of the dope of the drop. Dopeness of the dope of drop. Let's compare that to this. So the problem that I noted pretty much immediately was that this was too clean, and it was a high frequency presence problem. And I figure it's because you balanced your thing to make this bit work, and that's a good idea. You know, it worked. And that the result though was that when you didn't have all the stuff that it built up to, all of the lead elements, all of the whatever noise elements there were, it didn't sound like there was much because I was mostly just a very clean hit on the basses, but they're kind of low end focused, and that they felt a little naked, especially since you lit up there quite well. This was I love how epic this is. Look at all the stuff happening here. Like this is not your average build up. This is good. Like you could just, you know, put X on and make a thing and make all the parameters altered and whatever, but this is like there's a story in here. Like that's what I like to see in stuff, and this track has it. It has and you know, it tends not to stay too long on some elements. So like for example, this drop does here's our 16 bars of the bass fun. And look at all that bass fun. Oh, the bass fun was good too. Where's those sounds, right? The really good ones that tended to cap stuff, like this guy. Oof. A few other times those hits came in. Good stuff. I could see them show up most of the time. But they did it, but point I was making, yep. So enough variation in here, but it's enough overall cohesion that this part felt nice and cool. Look at this transition. Look at that. And now we're doing the next part, right? The B part, and this is helped on by like the melodic progression, and this is like a pretty basic strategy for when you're gonna write this kind of stuff, is that you have your bass performing kind of element and then your musical element. And this is how I do all of my junk, because this is just fine. It works great. And unless you have something more specific, and sometimes the more specific stuff is something you end up doing later. Like it turns out, this is interesting kind of tangent to go on, but I would frequently lament like if I could write songs that were only drops and get away with it, like I would. That's what I would say, right? And the reality is of course I would do that, because I made the thing and I'm already used to what it sounds like and I know everything about it, and so I already know how to look for and how to jam with it. But a regular average listener basically literally needs to be trained on what the song is before getting dumped in on it. And I honestly, is just literally anyone who isn't you needs to be trained on it. So an intro is actually fairly important when it comes to layering in and landing on a thing being a thing. So that being the case, after you do the thing, that's also having trained the listener on what's happening, which means you can go a little hammier and a little harder and the second half, and and they'll still follow, because they're in that universe now. If they've stuck with it, they'll listen long enough to let the second drop happen, they're in there. So that means you can take them places, and that means that you don't have to adhere to the really bog ass standard, like block, here it comes kind of thing. Now you can be like, cool, you know how long this is, you know how long it is, over, like, and that you can still play around with, it's still even time counting and bars and stuff, but you don't gotta be so rigid about it. You don't gotta be so rigid about it. That but the song kind of like when you're reading a book and you get about halfway there, you get used to how the author says things, and you get to be able to read some of the more complex jokes they make, because now you get that they're making certain kinds of references and not just saying a kind of word for a word or whatever. Like that's, try to read Lord of the Rings sometimes, parse some of those jokes. Anyway, moving on to Altitude by Vaeon. Vaeon. So many vowels. Okay. Wow. Let's hear that. Dim trails. All right, so holy crap. I think we know where we're going with this. That's a lot of high frequencies. That I'm not even sure you guys could hear that on YouTube, because that's way up there at the range of where MP3s cut off on stuff. But that was so loud. That was so freakishly loud. Hi, and I turned it down on my monitoring because I didn't want to. But yeah, so I questioned so many things about how and why you chose to go that high and that hard. Mostly about what it is about that you could possibly have heard that, because I get like that it sounds and feels cool. Lots of hi-hats that I liked do have the extremely high frequency tinge that I then know I'll have to curtail because when it gets layered with all the other stuff, it'll add up to being this sort of nonsense. But something that's like only that, like, you either must have pristine hearing and just thought that was just the bee's knees, or you have terrible hearing and just thought that was the bee's knees. Like, that's what confuses the hell out of me about this. But I just don't recommend doing that. Also, just for how relative loud it is. Like, it was just so much louder than everything else almost. It made everything feel dark and lackluster, especially the snare. The snare felt very flat in comparison to other stuff. I liked the hell out of this lead, though, that you had going on. Like this guy. That lead, called a lead, that sound. Whatever that sound was, good stuff. I like the progression. I like the feeling of it. I like the track. It also had that kind of boxy, like some stuff went on for a little too long. Like all of these sections could have been half as long. Like this could have been half and half and got up there twice as fast, and this would be half as long. This, like, the previous song's arrangement actually would have worked out quite well for this track. Actually, just about everything about this track would work out pretty much okay if it weren't for this very high frequency shenanigan going on up there. I would also say some things about how much harder the kick could have gone versus the sub, certain side chaining choices, and also like some of them would also be solved about how maybe the snare is, about how maybe the snare is. I'm sure that statement made sense in some languages, but what I mean to say is I would have gone with the kick and the snare to be a little harder in the side chaining, so that the snide chaining that would make it come out a little more, because right now it sort of sounds pretty schmoosy with just about everything else happening, and there's a lot of everything else, and everything else is cool. Like, I like the balance of it in the sense that you could hear it all happening. Like, it's hard to do that. That's not just a mixing thing, because it's also an arrangement thing that you got to write enough that they're all doing things that sound good when they're all be done together. That's usually where a lot of that falls apart. So, decent track. Extraordinary choices. Moving on to Ron's Trash, Bubble Paradise. Cool looking. Them trails. and Tails. So this was fun. This reminded me of a lot of really old FL Studio demo files, specifically the ones that like Scott Fisher himself would do. And I liked that all sounded, that might have sounded away, but that's actually like, I like those songs, and I also used them as sort of like my educational vessels when to learning to use FL. And like, this is sort of what that all reminded me of. It was a very kind of calming, breakbeat focused, like there's some stuff happening and it's sort of trancy, and it goes well in the background. I would have liked there to have been a snare. There is a snare thing that happens at the time that a snare would normally happen, but it's just so very light. And normally I would be like, yeah, cool, light snare. Like sometimes it happens, but like but the kick is nice. It's in there nicely, and it's also loud and punchy. And I just want it to also be also the balanced, as contrasted balanced snare. That's just how I like the kit to go, which is not a universal truth, and this was probably fine. But that's what got to me about this track was I just kept waiting for there to be the full break. I was waiting for it to become something, because it felt like this was like kind of writing a build. I did like the lead. I liked it's kind of playing around with the pitches on some things, and then also like looking at the tails of the very sharp filter is fun in just watching it visually. And it's active. It's kind of infected mushroomy, this whole thing, and I kind of dig it. So good job. So this is Yeah by Kigh, and it's post edit. So let's hear the edit. And then it just stops. That's just how that song ends. Okay, well, I did say the outro could be anything. This track desperately needed some swing. I liked a lot of the palette it's got. I liked, especially this full force sort of ending verse bit. This felt great. This was pretty well perfect. It felt a bit awkward the first time it propped up here. There's a kind of a shake going on, and I don't know if that's intentional or if that's an artifact of your compression. If that's an artifact of your compression, what I recommend doing is getting in on automating your release times on things. Because in whatever master compressor you're using, there's going to be a perfect kind of sweet spot for like the best closest value, but the real true perfect value is the one that's tuned to whatever nonsense you're doing. And that whippy wappy kind of over compressy sound is not just a product of how hard you're compressing into something, but also how fast it's being compressed. Is it too fast or is it too slow? And that whip is a too slow thing. Too fast and starts to distort. And with as much high frequency presence as happening here, I don't even think you notice. So either just speed it up and it'll sound better, or time it. And with plucks and things like that, or like a big pad stabs, you could just put an automated curve to happen with it that is just moving your automation time on your release times. And that's what I would do. If that's what's out. Or that's something that's intentional. I would question the validity of that choice. Something else in the build-up. So I liked in the beginning this switch up he did. And that was cool. When it was by itself, though, that did not work. Not even with the foreshadowing into this next bit. Which did work because it had all the parts. Let's see, that works because it has the parts. This is by itself. It does not have the parts. And it just comes off as being off time. And like it's kind of clever and interesting in a regard, but like only if that's the thing that you're like, if being thrown off is the thing you're interested in doing, because what it does is it throws you off. Because despite the fact that it's true that the switch up is being switching, there is usually other stuff is being switching. There's usually other stuff there to maintain the original beat so that you're not actually lost. This is the one time in the track that it doesn't do that, and it kind of shows. You could kind of do that though, and you could either, I would think, either come back into it before this part happens, or only have it be this long. So like start it here and then go back to regular time here, or start it here and go back to here. So like maintain timing here. That's sort of texture, a possible option I would put in there. The rest of this is okay, and I mentioned swing, so. So instead of dan, and then this like bam ba bam bam ba ba, and people like ba ba da ba 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 ba, like kind of swing, really just turn up the swing knob, and that would make, I would think that would give just the one extra iota of life to these parts that this needs, because these pads and sections and textures are cool. The lead is a little lost in here, is a thing that happens. And there's a lot of ways you can solve that, but like the problem that's occurring in here now is that the lead is lost. And there is something in there, and it is singing, and it's kind of cool. And the singing and coolness of it is what makes it move on. I also liked how fast this got here. I kept talking about other tracks about having their intros being too long, and this is pretty good. This is like stuff's happening, adding up, and right when it gets to be like, okay, now turns on. Good stuff. Like, at least it gives you the beat, which is sort of what I consider to be on, versus just kind of languishing around and sort of patty nonsense, which can sometimes be the case. And here, good job with Kigh. Anyway, that's about it for today. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day. See you next week.